This episode of Geek's Guide to the Galaxy is made possible thanks to support from listeners like you. So if you enjoyed the show and want it to continue, please support us on Patreon over at patreon.com/geeks or via PayPal over at geeksguideshow.com/crowdfunding. And I want to give a special thank you to Anton Castelli and Dan, who both just signed up this week to support us on Patreon, to Gary Flood, who just increased his pledge amount, and to Anders Kilstedt, who just made a very generous contribution to the show via PayPal. So big thanks again to everyone who's contributed. We really appreciate it. All right, so now let's get to our show. Hi, I'm David Bart Kirtley, author of the book Save Me Please and Other Stories, and welcome to episode 581 of Geek's Guide to the Galaxy. Today on the show we'll be discussing the movies Gattaca, The Truman Show, Simone, In Time, and Anon, all of which were written by Andrew Niccol. And this will include spoilers for all of those movies, so just be aware of that. And I'm joined by three guests. So first up we've got Andrea Kail, making her 39th appearance on the show. She's a graduate of the Odyssey Writers Workshop, and her short fiction appears in the Writers of the Future anthology, Fantasy Magazine, and Lightspeed. She's been a television writer, producer, and script supervisor for shows such as Late Night with Conan O'Brien, The Chew, and WWE's Monday Night Raw and Friday Night SmackDown, and she's currently a writer for Pixelberry Studios. So Andrea, welcome to the show.
Good to be back, Dave.
The next up we've got Matthew Kressel, making his 36th appearance on the show. His novel Queen of Static, the follow-up to his groundbreaking novel King of Shards, is available now. And his short story collection Histories Within Us will be out early next year from Census 5 Press. Together with Ellen Datlow, he hosts the monthly Fantastic Fiction reading series in New York City. So Matt, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Dave. Good to be back.
And also joining us today is Tom Gerencer, making his 31st appearance on the show. He's the author of the business book Think Like Google, and the short story collection Intergalactic Refrigerator Repairmen Seldom Carry Cash, and his popular science book How It's Made, written for the Discovery Channel, is out now. His middle grade novel The Magic Ski Mountain will be out in December. So Tom, welcome to the show.
Really happy to be here again.
Okay, and so how this panel came about is I was just reading stuff about Gattaca, and I happened to notice that the same person wrote Gattaca and The Truman Show, two of the best movies of the 90s, which I never knew before. And the name Andrew Niccol meant nothing to me, but he wrote both of them. And then I also saw that he wrote three other science fiction movies, two of which, In Time and Simone, I had heard of but never watched because I heard they were bad, and one called Anon, which I'd never heard of at all. And I was just kind of like struck that somebody who wrote Gattaca and The Truman Show, and literally like Gattaca, I've said for years, was probably one of my like top 5 science fiction movies of all time. Like, you know, but somebody who wrote a movie like that for me, and The Truman Show, which I also think is great, you know, had these other movies which were not as well, you know, which were very poorly received. So I was just kind of curious to find out more about that. Like, what's the story with that? And so I'm going to assume that nobody knew the name Andrew Niccol or knew that that the same person had written any of these 5 movies, or am I wrong about that? Did anybody know that the same person had written any of these 5 movies?
No, I'd never.
No, not until you mentioned it.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is really striking. I mean, like when we talked about Charlie Kaufman recently, you know, I knew that he had written those movies. And it just seems like Andrew Niccol has taken a lot of pains to avoid publicity. You know, like usually preparing for these podcasts, you know, I can easily find audio or video interviews that are, you know, an hour long. There's like more than I can listen to with most directors or whatever. But for this one, I couldn't find any that were longer than like 5. Like most of them are like 5 minutes. Some are like maybe like 18 minutes. But he really does seem to intentionally fly below the radar. And so I sent you guys this Wired article. It's called "Director Andrew Niccol Lives in His Own Truman Show, and So Do You." Did anyone have I know I just sent it to you this morning, but did anyone have a chance to read that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was,
yeah. So Andrea, what anything stick out in your mind from that article?
What struck me about it, or the thing that stuck in my mind about it, was talking about how you see the same people over and over again, and they're like the extras in the movie of your life. That really resonated with me because I have the same sort of situation all the time where I'll, get on a bus near my neighborhood and I'm like, oh, I've seen that person before. So I think that's just a real truism of life, is that there are people out there who are the extras in your movie.
Yeah. So just to be clear, so in this interview, Andrew Niccol says that he just always had this sense that that reality wasn't quite real, and that maybe he was the main character in a TV show or something like that. You can see how this informed The Truman Show if you're familiar with that movie. Well, so how about Matt? You read the article too? Like, anything stick out in your mind from the article?
Yeah, I mean, what you said, that he goes out of his way to sort of remain obscure and semi-anonymous, and the fact that he's like, how do you know I didn't hire, an actor to play me for this interview? I thought was it's very interesting because he does these, big budget films and it's very kind of rare for a director to want to kind of be that obscure with, something that is reaching the, potentially millions of people. It's this interesting, like, dichotomy, almost like a schizophrenia there, which we'll get into later when I talk about his films. But I found that interesting.
Yeah, it says he's never had a publicist, like a publicist that he, had for himself, or that he had, that he wanted.
I really respect all of that. One, he's basically, what he's saying is, I want the work to speak for itself. Yeah. Don't ask me to interpret it for you. What do you think? Which I really appreciate. Just like, it's like a throwback to the real auteur directors of the past, which is like, don't talk to me, speak to the art. Right. And also not having a publicist, just having worked in the industry for so many years, let me tell you, the worst people in the world are publicists. They're just really bad. Sorry, I'm generalizing.
No offense to any publicists who may be listening to this episode.
to any publicists, but they can be generally not great people.
There was that show on Netflix, I think, with Anna Paquin, where she was a publicist in England. What was it called? And they were just generally played as horrible.
She was it was almost more like crisis media kind of stuff that she was doing.
Yeah. They can be, especially the crisis people, they can be especially awful.
Yeah, well,
because they have no morals.
Okay, but before we get off on too much of a tangent on how awful publicists are, but you said about how he's like an auteur and artsy and stuff. One of the quotes from the article that jumps out to me is he says that whenever he hires somebody, he asks them if they prefer the Guggenheim or the Getty, and if they say the Getty, they get fired. Like they don't get the job. Just off.
I know. I love that. It's so random.
But how about Tom? What'd you think of this article?
I did not get. I apologize. I had a super busy day between kids and work, and I wish I'd got.
You're fired, Tom.
Yeah.
You chose the wrong museum. I'm sorry.
Well, you missed out. It's a great article. Everyone should go check it out. But yeah, let me give you my, even though Andrew Niccol has tried to hide, I was able to put together a biography for him. So sorry, Andrew Niccol, all your secrets are out now. But so he was born in New Zealand, and at the age of 21, he moved to London to get into advertising. And, was filmed TV ads, or directed TV ads for about 10 years, I think. And then he got just he wanted to do something more artistic. He was tired of telling stories that lasted 30 seconds or whatever and was trying to sell a car or whatever. And so he moved to Hollywood, and he had this script for the Truman Show that he had written. And he's like, I just knew that this script would sell. It was like, just the idea was so compelling. I just knew it. And he was able to get it in front of powerful Hollywood producer Scott Rudin, who did in fact love the script, or at least the concept for the script, but he did not trust this advertising guy to direct a feature film. And so they brought on Peter Weir, an established director, to direct it. And then Peter Weir made Andrew Niccol rewrite the script 12 times before he was happy with it. It was apparently originally more of a sort of like dark sci-fi thriller kind of thing. And Peter Weir wanted it to be more of a comedy. And so so that was kind of his imprint, was making it more of a comedy. And then they got Jim Carrey sort of at the height of his popularity to star in it, which obviously made it a big, raised its profile incredibly. And so, but they had to wait for Jim Carrey. Like, Jim Carrey wasn't available for a year, so the production was kind of on ice for a year while they were waiting for him to be available. And in that time, Andrew Niccol wrote and directed Gattaca. He was able, I guess, probably because he had one film in development or production already, he was able to get a deal to direct Gattaca, which was a gigantic box office bomb, but got great reviews from critics and is still remembered, sort of a cult critical darling today. Oh, and then the Truman Show came out, and it was a big commercial success. So that kind of was Andrew Niccol's early career and kind of how he made his name with those two big movies. And so I said, going into this, I remembered Gattaca. I hadn't rewatched it in probably about 20 years. I watched it for the first time in college. And then I know, Andrea, we watched it for one of our movie nights at Rob's apartment.
Did we?
Oh, yeah. I remember this thing. Okay. I don't know 100% if you were there or not. Maybe you weren't, but that group, we did watch it. And I remember, like I said, I remembered it as like one of my top 5 probably science fiction movies of all time. So, so Andrea, going into this, did you share that kind of feeling about Gattaca, or kind of how did you remember it?
I remembered it as a good movie. I think I saw it when it first came out. I remember it being good. I have no memory of seeing it at Rob's house with you guys, but maybe that did happen because I have holes in my memory sometimes. But watching it again. Well,
wait, okay.
Sorry.
But you just remembered it being
great.
Good or great or?
Great. But,
okay.
But great in the way that it's like a profound film instead of, oh, that's a great fun movie. Do you see the distinction I'm making? I'm not quite sure.
Yeah. Like you thought it was more like you were like impressed by it more than you were entertained by it. Like,
yes.
Yeah.
And so that was my first impression. My impression of seeing it. And so, yes, it has been 20 years since I've seen it. So coming at it again, I know the story. But sitting and immersing myself in it, it was, I couldn't believe how good it was. It truly is one of the best science fiction movies, I don't know, ever made. It's a fantastic film in every way. It's gripping and, somewhat prescient. I think all of his movies sort of are. And just in every way, like beautiful. The score works, the visuals. A lot of his movies share that same kind of spare, brutalist architecture, gray tones.
Yeah, you can kind of see. I mean, it kind of looks like a car commercial. Like you can tell that he had a lot of experience making things look good on screen.
Yes, but it's also that aesthetic of very quiet. There's not a lot of sound, and very few people. There's crowds of people, but they're a very small number of characters. And it's that this one in Anon, which we're not talking about yet, but they say they share that sort of same aesthetic of that gray brutalist architecture kind of thing. So yeah, this movie truly, it was re-impressed me watching it again.
Well, yeah, let me just explain what it's about if anyone hasn't seen it. So we're in the future, and society is kind of divided into two castes, and most people have their embryos selected for genetic fitness. And so all the people who have done that are kind of the upper class of society. And then anyone who hasn't had that done exists as sort of a lower class relegated to doing menial labor. And so Ethan Hawke, our hero, is one of these members of the lower class, but he dreams of being an astronaut. And so he cooperates with a member of the upper class, Jude Law, who has fallen on hard times. And Jude Law kind of sells his identity to Ethan Hawke, and Ethan Hawke infiltrates the upper echelons of society so he can go to space and be an astronaut. There's a lot of complications to the story, but that's the basics of it. So Matt, what was kind of your feeling returning to Gattaca? Kind of what did you think of it before, and what were you expecting out of it?
So I loved this movie, and I still love it. So this movie came out at kind of a very significant moment in my life. Not to get dour or anything, but my roommate in college killed himself, and I was kind of floundering afterwards, like very depressed, and didn't know what to do with my life, and was considering a career in space sciences, not an astronaut, but something like that. And, more on the technical aspect of it. And this movie just like hit all those nerves for me for those reasons. And, I remember really liking it and thinking that this movie was super powerful, and also knowing at the time when I first saw it that this is not going to connect with the masses, that it's too subtle. It's like it's talking about, something that I don't think the public at the time had a lot of awareness about, tailoring your DNA. But to me,
yeah, well, let's just explain, I guess, that this movie came out during the Human Genome Project. So it was kind of in the news that, the first attempts to sequence an entire human genome were underway. But it was all totally brand new. None of this stuff existed in reality at that time.
Yeah. I mean, I think the film works on multiple levels. It is entertaining to the point that I get lost in the story and I forget I'm watching a film. But at the same time, if you step back and pay attention to the plot beats, the story, it's really compelling. And the dialogue in it, like, it's very noirish. It could almost be like, if you step back a little bit, it almost sounds cliche when they say it, but like the acting is so good and the timing is so good that it just works. Like, there are some times when that noir language just really hits, and I think in this movie in particular, it works. And the brutalist sets, as Andrea said, the brutalist architecture, and then the sort of classic cars, and the sort of it reminded me in some ways of like the Blade Runner aesthetics, or at least maybe not like the cyberpunk aspect, but sort of the retro 40s, 50s-ish kind of Americana, the way, like, if you remember Rachel from Blade Runner, the way she was sort of dressed in that sort of retro future attire, which I really liked. And then if you've ever seen the film Alphaville, definitely felt that they were riffing off of that. It's a film that I think still works, and I think, if anything, it becomes better because I feel like we've grown into what the film is discussing. Like, some of the things that were hypothetical in the film at the time are very real today, like with gene editing and the idea of like, choosing what traits your child may have. And I don't know if we're quite there, but we're close.
Close.
Yeah, well, I mean, like what's shown at the beginning is basically, it's called pre-implantation genetic diagnosis. And that's totally exists right now, where they fertilize multiple embryos and sequence them, and then you pick the one that you want. I mean, most of the time it's done now if there's like both parents are carriers for some genetic disease or something. Mm-hmm. But there was a Stanford professor years ago wrote a book called The End of Sex, where he was arguing that basically everybody in the future would be conceived by IVF and undergo this pre-implantation genetic diagnosis because it would be covered by insurance, and it would just be cheaper for insurance companies to cover it than to pay for the health outcomes if it wasn't done. And so like, yeah, that would just become the normal thing. And I think that's what this movie shows. And that's, as far as I understand, a completely realistic, basically inevitable outcome for the future. But let's get Tom in here too. So Tom, what's your story with Gattaca?
I'm sorry, I didn't have time to watch any of these movies. It's been a busy month, No, I had never seen this before somehow.
Oh wow.
I had never. Yeah, I don't know how that happened, but I knew of it, and I knew that it was probably something to do with gene editing because of the title. Gattaca is the G and the A and the T and the A and the C are all like code, genetic code markers. Somehow, like GACT.
They're the first letters of the 4 amino acids that are programmed.
Yeah. Okay. So I don't know enough about it to know anything useful, but I knew that it had something to do with DNA. So I was like, okay, the movie's got to be about clones or something like that, which I was wrong. But I thought I was blown away by this thing. I thought this was a great movie. It's got a fantastic premise. It's got a constant parade of complications that just tighten and tighten around the main character. And I absolutely loved the kind of emotional payoff for the thing, the detail about Jude Law's character burning himself at the end, but sending a lock of hair up into space with the hero. That just drove me bats because it seemed like, it was the kind of icing on the cake or the big clue that like all of these genetically engineered characters in the movie have so bought into the myth of their perfection through their DNA that the most important thing about them in their own eyes is their DNA. So Jude Law almost worships his own DNA to the point that he sends that lock of hair up into space, and that to him is the great success of his life, that he gets to send his DNA up into space. And he fights, at least that's the way I took it. And he fights so hard for the opportunity to do it all through the movie. He's like fighting and fighting. And you're like, why does this guy even care? He's just, he just drinks all the time. And why is he so invested in this other guy, like getting into space? Why does he care? And then you realize at the end, I feel like his whole mission, Jude Law's whole mission was to get that lock of hair into space. And when he finally accomplishes it, the logical choice for him is to burn the failed part of himself that didn't live up to the promise of his genetics.
That's an interesting take.
Yeah.
I didn't quite take it the same way, but
okay. Yeah, I'll have to go back and watch it because the lock of hair, I confess, didn't make a huge impression on me watching it this time. But what you say?
I felt. Oh, go ahead, Tom.
It made me feel like that's what it was saying because all of the other characters who were genetically engineered were so invested in their DNA that you could kind of see that like that's the key thing that they care about. They don't really care about like what they actually do with it. They don't really care like about their own actions, their own, like nature versus nurture. They don't care about the nurture part at all. They just care about the nature or the engineering part. I
didn't see it as him sending his DNA. I saw it as more of that he gave like his literal self to Ethan Hawke, Jude Law, he's giving his blood, he's giving his urine, he's giving everything he has so that this guy could go into space. And then when he finally goes into space, he's like, here's a lock of my hair. Here's the last bit of me. I've given you everything, including my hair. Here's a little bit of me. And then it's also like a lock of hair is also a memento. It's to remember somebody by. And, you know, it becomes that much more poignant when you spoiler that he kills himself. And, you know, that's literally the last of him. And that to me was so affecting for the reasons I mentioned when I first saw this movie. Like, I probably cried when I saw that scene.
Well,
yeah.
yeah. Oh, well, let me jump in there because I'll just tell you, like, so I said, you know, this was top 5 science fiction movie for me. So I may have had overly high expectations going back to it after 20 years, but it wasn't as good as I remembered. I mean, I still think it's a must-watch movie. I think it's one of the smartest, you know, most artistic science fiction movies ever seen. So I don't want to take away anything from it, but I thought I remembered basically everything that happened. And I did remember almost every scene pretty much exactly, but there were a bunch of things that I hadn't remembered that I didn't like quite as much. So I'm just curious what you guys think of them. And so we're talking about Jude Law, and Jude Law like makes this movie. He's so good in this movie. I think this is the first time I'd ever seen him. And his character is just so full of life and intensity and drama, and I just love everything about him. But I found the like relationship between Ethan Hawke and Uma Thurman sort of like fell a little flat for me on this rewatch, which is kind of ironic because they actually did fall in love and get married during the making of this movie. Yeah, I just thought, and this is something, having watched all these Andrew Niccol movies, I feel like a lot of, like pretty consistently, I don't find the male-female relationships that compelling, like the way that they're written. Yeah, Andrea, go ahead.
Well, I see where you're coming from. And also the thing I noticed about all of these movies is there's really only one female character. Almost, except for Truman Show, everything else is just one female character. But it feels to me in Gattaca and also in several of the other ones, it's because it's not quite real life. It's this repressed, mannered society. So there is no great passion. None of these people are passionate. And even Ethan Hawke's passion is suppressed beneath this mask that he has to wear. This is his passion. He's achieving his dream, and yet he has to keep it all under wraps because he can't be seen to be that person.
That was a little bit of a difficulty for me rewatching this, is because it's like he's devoted his entire life to this mission and tricking everybody and everything, and then he like just starts dating Uma Thurman like days before he's supposed to leave, which is like this gigantic risk to everything he's worked so hard for, and it just seemed not consistent with his character as this like single-minded determination as it had been established. So, and it wasn't something I was expecting to bother me, but it did sort of bother me on this recent rewatch.
Yeah, but people really do stupid shit. And people do stupid stuff all the time.
That's not true, Andrea. That's not true.
Let me tell you from experience, people do really stupid shit. And I feel like, that's how reality is. People do dumb things. And also, people also self-sabotage. And I think there's a sort of, a hint of that here. Is it's almost there. And you get slightly sidetracked. And there's this element of self-sabotage about it.
Yeah.
Which is a very human thing.
Okay, so that didn't bother anybody else.
I questioned it. I was like, because I'm sitting there going, well, that's really a bad idea.
When they went to the club or whatever that was, then I was like, shouldn't he be keeping a low profile right before his launch? But I went with it. I mean, I think, the hallmark of a good movie is that you overlook some of its flaws because the rest of it's so compelling that when, I thought that for a second. But also, I think some of the dialogue, like the things that they would say to each other, the way they spoke was very noirish, right? It was not like the way normal people would speak to each other. And maybe that didn't seem authentic to you, but I was just like in love with the kind of whole aesthetic of it that I didn't mind it as much.
Yeah.
I completely agree about the noir part. I thought that their relationship was very reminiscent of like, Fred McMurray, and I can't think of his opposite in Double Indemnity, but
yeah,
you're not a fan of that movie?
No, I'm just trying to remember her name.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. So yeah, I mean that kind of noirish, like you can tell they're crazy about each other, but they're very understated in the way they show it. And I liked that. I loved her character actually. And I loved, because she was one of those complicated, like, oh, genetics is the most important thing. But on the other hand, she wasn't perfect genetically and she knew it. And she was really bothered by it. And I really liked his brother, that played by the star of the 90s show Parker Lewis Can't Lose, I believe, which was a really fun show, but in such a different role. And it's such a, I don't know. I just thought the ending was a triumph. I thought seeing someone who's merely human succeeding was like, yes, we still got it. I absolutely loved the scene where his brother asked him, how are you doing this? How are you doing any of this? And his answer is, I never saved anything for the swim back. I thought that was really
Let me just explain that in case anyone didn't actually watch this movie like Tom. So the two brothers, the genetically, privileged one and the genetically non-privileged one, as kids, they have this competition where they swim out into the ocean, and it's sort of a game of chicken to see who will turn back first. And the genetically not privileged one always loses. And then one time he wins, and that kind of sets the, is the change that sets his life on a whole new course. And we don't know how he was able to do it. And it turns out at the end, he says that I was just not saving any energy for the swim back. I was either going to win or I was going to drown. And that's how, and it's that willpower and determination and willingness to take risks and never give up that has enabled him to succeed where others who had more advantages have failed. And and that's always stuck in my mind. And I've always loved that so much. But so I have also, though, always had a problem with this movie where there's the issue of like, is what he's doing actually ethical, right? Because he's lying, he's pretending he has 20/20 vision when he doesn't, he's lying. He has this heart condition which could cause him to drop dead at any moment. And they're sending him on this mission they can only do once every 70 years, which is probably it seems to be a pretty important mission. We don't know exactly what they're going to be doing, but it seems like if an astronaut today was lying about having a heart condition, like a NASA astronaut, we would say this is not ethical. And
I think you were meant to overlook that because we were supposed to see their society as unethical. So he was doing what he needed to do to succeed in an unethical society.
Yeah.
That's the way I took it. Like I didn't look at him and like, oh, what you're doing is unethical, because I just was like, this whole society, it's like it's there's a caste system, and then if you're not born in the right caste, you're just
but granted, the society is unfair, but if the mission is really important and he's jeopardizing the mission by joining it, isn't that sort of selfish? And
perhaps
I saw it the same way Matt and Andrea did, but now that you say that, Dave, I can see that point. That like, what if the people he goes up into space with, maybe there's a couple other people on the ship or something, or maybe like Dave said, there's something that is really important about this mission to help the survival of the race or the species or something like that, and he's monkeying with that out of his own desire to subvert this unethical society, then is that the two wrongs don't make a right? Basically,
I don't think that's what the film was about. I mean, because if the film was about the Titan exploration, they would have gone more into that. They really didn't. It's really about human spirit and determination.
None of his movies are about the tech. It's all about the story, the humans.
And maybe that's why the whole spaceship, every time he watches a spaceship go up, it looks like this fairy tale thing. It's like it's almost like saying this is an allegory. It's not, the spaceship isn't what's important.
Well,
the mission is.
Well, I think that was just 90s CGI, but
Probably.
But even at the end, they get on the spaceship in business suits. I mean,
exactly.
It's like, it's not about the science. It's not about going to space. It's about the triumph of the human spirit.
Right.
But so I was thinking, I think that the movie, like, I think it's, I wouldn't necessarily change it, but I do think that it's a little like confusing the ethics of the situation to make his issue that he has this heart condition where he could drop dead at any moment. And it seems to me like what's really unfair about this society is when he goes in for his job interview and they just like take his DNA and they're like, okay, you've got the job, no other questions asked, that they sort of fetishize genetic potential over the actual capabilities or competencies of the person standing in front of them, that they were willing to give Jude Law this opportunity, even though he's like this alcoholic, suicidal, arrogant, probably mostly lazy kind of person. But so it seems like there's two different things going on, that the prejudice against people who don't have a ton of genetic potential but have through a force of will made themselves formidable and competent, like that's totally unjustified, that prejudice. But then like keeping people who might drop dead at any moment off the critical shuttle mission is pretty justified. So I feel like if they maybe stuck to the first sort of prejudice and not made it a heart condition but made other things going on, I feel like that might have been a little more thematically consistent.
Well, also, though, they did mention, they're like, he has the gene for it, but that doesn't mean that he's necessarily going to die.
Yeah.
Right?
Although it doesn't seem like an unfair prejudice to keep him off.
No, it wasn't just the gene. He said, I should already be dead by now. Like, by the statistics, I should already be dead. By the
statistics, right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
People beat statistics all the time. And like, people are born with all sorts of genes and live till 90 years old. People smoke a pack a day of cigarettes their entire lives and then live till 95. Like, I
totally agree.
Like,
I could just concede.
It's a predisposition. It's not a death sentence.
No, I agree. I just concede Dave's point. Like, okay, are we going to roll the dice? And if we get 1 through a 1 or a 2 on a 6-sided dice, are we going to say, it's okay that this guy could die and jeopardize the mission, or should it be a smaller chance? Or what if it's a 1 in 5? Are we willing to take that risk with possibly other people on the mission? I'm just saying, I'm playing devil's advocate, but I'm just saying I can see that point that Dave is making. But
human beings have done, these sorts of things without any kind of anybody taking their genetic predispositions into account.
Right.
So it's a completely ridiculous false premise that, you will definitely have this, therefore you can't have the same number of, you can't have the same amount of opportunities as someone who doesn't have this gene. It's just.
But there's like the scene where he's running on the treadmill and, his heart is racing out of control. And like, would you send, if it was just like a NASA astronaut whose heart reacted that way on the treadmill, would you send that person on a vital or, important mission?
I mean, he's definitely lying. He's definitely, scamming his way there. So, I mean, I don't think that he's meant to be this like flawless exemplar of human being. I think it's just a story of a man who wants something so badly that was denied to him that he'll do anything to get it. And I think that to me is the interesting story. And yeah, he could die in the middle of a mission and endanger his crew and all that stuff. But I feel like that is not what this movie was about.
Yeah, but I mean, I don't know, maybe it should, because it's like he's sort of presented in the movie as a hero, but I'm saying, well, maybe he's actually the villain. But then Matt's saying, well, maybe he's like this in this interesting place in the middle. And that's one of the.
Yeah, I mean, he's a noir protagonist. The noir protagonists are always got
gray areas.
Exactly.
Sure.
I never really saw him as being, pure
Superman.
hero. I think that a lot of modern media conditions us to see the protagonist as either being like the pure hero or the pure villain, and it's like,
yes.
and then, when you have sort of ambiguous morals, it puts us in us Westerners in that mindset, like, well, where does he lie? Where does he lie? He lies in that ambiguous area. I think we all lie in.
But all people lie in that gray area. Nobody's either all good or all bad.
Right,
Some people
exactly.
are all bad, but nobody, everybody's got dark places. Everybody's got blind spots. It's just human.
Yeah.
And I think that's the point, is that he's a real human. Everybody else comes across as a robot.
I just wonder if the movie could have leaned into that more, because I feel like just the average viewer would just come away feeling that he's the hero. This character is basically just a hero. And I think there's more ambiguity there.
Well, I think, and I know we're going to talk about the other films.
Actually, let me just add one more thing, and then the other thing is I feel like the movie the way that the genetic technology is presented is more or less just like it's bad, it's dystopian, it's not natural. We'd be better off going the natural way, which I don't, just like in real life I don't agree with. So I feel like those two things, like maybe the ambiguity could have been highlighted a little bit more, just like how like his darker tones and the like very real upsides of the genetic technology maybe could have been emphasized a little bit more in this story. But Matt, go ahead.
I was just going to say that I feel like of all the films we watched, I know we're going to talk about them in a minute, but like Gattaca was the one where I felt that Andrew Niccol was giving the viewer the most freedom to sort of interpretation.
Mm-hmm.
There's whereas as you get further along, it's like pounding you over the head with the metaphor. And I feel like this was the one where he like took a step back and he's like, I'm just going to put these things on the screen and I'm not going to try to force feed you a morality. I mean, and let you decide how you feel about this rather than, the others, which we'll get into.
Well, I think that's the whole thing, is that you interpret the art the way it hits you,
Yeah.
I just want to ask one question.
Yeah.
Who do you think killed the mission director?
Did you watch the YouTube video?
I did not.
No, it was the director. It was the guy who
was it?
Yeah. Oh, it was totally him.
Yeah, they said, didn't they?
Yeah, but
they found his spit in the corpse's eye, but that doesn't necessarily, somebody could have planted it, but
he confessed.
But
but here's the thing. I think that's another thing open to interpretation, because we have the director, the one, Gore Vidal character. He knows that Ethan Hawke is his best navigator. He knows it.
Oh.
But
so
he might know that he's not really a genetically advanced people. He might know that he's, snuck his way in.
Oh, because the doctor knows.
Yes. The doctor
and
knows.
so
they've covered.
The director may know, so they're covering for him because they don't want to cancel the mission.
I think the director clearly knew. The director clearly knew, because there's that scene where he's vacuuming his keyboard, and which, why would you do that? And the director walks up and goes, "You're very fastidious," at the beginning of the movie, and he goes, "Oh yeah, well you got to keep things clean or something," and he walks away. And the director also looked over his shoulder when there was like the wanted poster of him on the screen, and he's looking at the wanted poster and he's looking at Ethan Hawke, and it seemed like obvious that the director knew.
But yes. Oh no, I think the director definitely knew. But I think the question is, did Ethan Hawke actually kill the guy, or did the director kill him because he knew the guy was going to expose Ethan Hawke? So which is it?
Point.
So it's open to another thing that's completely open to interpretation. Because you see that shot of Gore Vidal sitting there when they're like, "We got him," and he's smiling.
There's a YouTube video that goes through this theory with all the like relevant clips from the movie, if anyone wants to watch it. I mean, the most telling one of them to me was that Like, did Gore Vidal really beat the flight director or whatever to death with a keyboard? Like, does he just have the physical strength to do that? And it's really emphasized throughout the movie how violent Ethan Hawke is, like when he, like just beats the shit out of this cop for,
That's right.
So it's an interesting theory. I don't totally buy it, but it is definitely, I think, open to interpretation.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I think we need to move on to some of these other movies. So let's get into the Truman Show. So the Truman Show, the premise, like I alluded to earlier, is that there's a reality TV show, and the star of this show has been filmed ever since he was born, and he has never been told that he's on a TV show, and he's now an adult. He's like 35 or something.
30.
Yeah.
He's 30 because they're saying it's coming up on the 30th year.
Oh, right. Yeah. So he's 30, and he doesn't know he's on television, and as the story opens, he's just getting the facade is falling apart a little bit, and he's getting more and more clues that something is amiss in his world. So how about, and I'll just say, like, I remember this movie being great and really clever and funny. My memory was that the ending I felt was a little bit of a letdown. I don't agree with that now, but that was my initial impression, that I wanted more, and it ended with him just kind of like walking out of the sound stage. And I felt like more could have happened there. On this watch, I thought the ending was basically perfect. Maybe I would have a couple of suggestions, but overall, like, again, I consider this one of the best science fiction movies of the 90s. And it held up better, actually, than I remembered. But how about Tom? What's your story with The Truman Show?
I saw this movie in the theaters with my then girlfriend. I think I was like 24 or something like that, years old. Maybe younger, maybe a little older, I'm not sure. But it was really fun for me back then. I was like I imagine most people of that age are. I was somewhat arrogant. And so it really resonated with me that, like, here's this guy who the world he feels like the world revolves around him, and he finds out it actually does, which I love that about Zaphod Beeblebrox's character from Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, when he goes into the simulated universe and thinks he's always thought he's the most important person in the universe, and then he finds out he actually is. And then I had written a similar short story when I was a kid about a guy who thinks the world revolves around him and finds out he's in a short story. So it obviously does revolve around him. So, and that was all before I saw The Truman Show. So when I saw The Truman Show, I was like, yes, this just resonates with me 100% in so many ways. And it was really fun. I loved Jim Carrey back then, like most people my age at that time did. And thought it was a great movie. But I liked it even more now, watching it now, because back then I was mostly interested in it for the humor aspect of it. I was mostly like, it's so cool and it's funny and I love Jim Carrey. And now watching it now, it's more of the social commentary hits with me now. Especially, I think back then, I can't remember exactly when reality TV burst on the scene, but I feel this
was before any reality TV. Like The Real World.
This was before it.
Yeah, The Real World had like just premiered when this like was finishing production or something like that.
Oh my gosh! Wow, what
The Real World, the TV show I'm talking about on MTV.
Yes,
if anyone,
yeah.
Oh, not the actual Real World. Yeah. So no, I was pleasantly surprised by the way this worked out. I think Ed Harris's character is so menacing, but he's so sympathetic at the same time. Like the best villains to me are like Christoph Waltz in Inglourious Bastards, or like any kind of villain that's like super sympathetic at the same time. You're like, I totally understand this person, but I'm completely horrified by them at the same time. I just love that kind of villain. So I feel like Ed Harris nailed that, and obviously the writing that he got to base that on was there. But no, I thought this was really cool. I thought the relationship with Jim Carrey's character and his wife was really creepy and awful. And the most of the relationship between him and his best friend was creepy and awful and funny. It's such a fun thing to see creepy, awful, and funny and realistic all in the same movie. There are some things about it, like really it's going to look like a soundstage because they've got like a lot of like studio lighting or stuff like that, or like a lot of it you had to kind of suspend disbelief and say this stuff, if you really got into the technical aspects of it, you'd have to be like, it couldn't work like that. But I mean,
well, I'll just say my one real criticism rewatching it now was that I felt like the plot was a little static. Like basically he's just seeing things that are weird and then trying to escape kind of over and over and over again until the end. And he never like really confronts his best friend or his wife or the creator of the show, the Ed Harris character. And I felt like there was maybe they could have gone a little deeper on some of that stuff. So it's like super entertaining and great concept, but I felt like the characters could have been a little bit better developed, and Jim Carrey could have been given more of a chance to express how he feels about having this done to him, which he never really does in this story.
That could have been one of the 12 previous iterations of the script.
Yeah, might have been. Yeah. You know more about plot than I do, but I felt like it was really satisfying how he had all these sort of neuroses built in, and he had all these sort of blocks built in, and he just kept breaking through them one after the other, and he had to keep pushing harder and harder, and he had to keep setting more and more on the line in order to follow through with what he really wanted to do. It was like being asked over and over again, do you really, really want to go this far? And he was like, yes. And he'd push through another wall, and then he'd be given higher stakes and higher stakes. And to me, that was very satisfying. I didn't notice, but I will say, you know, a lot more than about.
Well, let's get Andrea in here. Andrea, what do you think about what we're saying here?
Which part of what we're saying here?
Well, I mean, anything you want to say about the Truman Show, but, you know, the thing I was raising is like, is the plot too static? Does Jim Carrey's character need more of an opportunity to express feelings about having been used in this way?
I mean, you bring it up, and yes, I think that would have personally been satisfying for me to see him beat the crap out of the best friend and the horrible wife and pretty much all these people. But I think for me, what this was about was just breaking out, because he still doesn't really know. He suspects right up into the minute the boat hits, you know, the flat, or, you know, the rounded flat of the horizon that doesn't exist. He's not quite sure. So I think his goal through the movie is just to find out if he's crazy or if this really is a fake reality. Mm-hmm. And he finds that out at the end. That's what it hit for me as this second time around. I know I've seen it when the movie first came out, but it was just one of those things that was like, yeah, that's a good movie. And I think a lot of that had to do with me being underwhelmed, had to do with Jim Carrey. Unlike Tom, he annoyed the crap out of me, and he did for years, because the movies he made before this were like Ace Ventura and Dumb and Dumber, and that is absolutely not my kind of movie at all.
Okay, Dumb and Dumber is absolutely my kind of movie. I'm just gonna put that out there.
That's fine. So, you know, and he was just that sort of ridiculous, over the top kind of character. And he is that kind of, he does that thing. He's one of those comedians that is always on, if you know what I mean, like Andy Kaufman. It's always the bit. So that always gets under my skin. And I remember this movie was the first one where it was like, this is Jim Carrey's first serious movie, but he was still doing the same, you know, over the top goofy character for me. Watching it now, it was not a completely different movie, but it meant it meant different things to me now. And the over the topness of it didn't strike me as over the top anymore. So I was able to connect more with the story this time. And the story is really
Could you verbalize what you mean by it meant so much more to you, or so many more things to you?
Just the injustice of it, and fighting back against, you know, the man, not letting them gaslight you, because it's one big gaslight machine, focused on one person. And the horror of our society getting so awful that this is something that is acceptable at all. And watching that person break out of an abusive relationship with the entire fucking world. And going, nope, I'm not the crazy one, goddammit. That was really powerful for me. Of, no, I'm not fucking crazy. that meant a lot.
How about Matt? What are you overall feelings at this point about the Truman Show?
So this is the first time I saw it. And
wow.
I know that's kind of hard to believe, but somehow I avoided seeing it. I think at the time I really disliked Jim Carrey, and I just didn't want to see it. And so my overall impressions of it is like, I thought that like the first 20 minutes were kind of slow, and then once you get past those first 20 minutes, it becomes really engaging. To me, it was like, a schizophrenic delusion or a psychotic break. If you've ever ingested large quantities of THC, the experience that everyone in the world is just actors, and I've had certain experiences where it's like, wait a minute, is this real? It was kind of like that. It was kind of like a Black Mirror episode, but with a happy ending instead of a dark ending. And I think that this movie is actually like a lot more sinister than it appears on the surface. If you're familiar with Gnosticism, it's very much like a Gnostic story where it's like he's trapped in this created reality, and like the demiurge, who's Ed Harris, Christoph, is like controlling his reality and literally manipulating his reality, in order, like literally faking the death of his father in order that he develops a phobia of traveling across water so that he will never leave this simulated reality. Is so absurd and crazy. But I find that this movie is very prescient in the sense that we actually do this now. There are reality shows where people don't realize they're on a show right at first. Maybe there's some kind of form or disclaimer that they did it to my sister. My sister was on What Not to Wear, and they secretly were filming her for a few weeks before she realized she was being filmed. So yeah, that aspect of it I found really haunting and terrifying. And when his friend Marlon, Noah Emmerich, is basically trying to convince him, he's like, I'm your buddy, I love you, man. What, this is you're delusional. Like that, to me, I didn't find funny at all.
No, Ed Harris talking in his ear in the microphone, telling him exactly what to say. Telling
him what to say, and then like all the audiences on TV is like, the audience is watching at bars and at home, they're all enraptured by this story. And it was like this horrifying thing where it's like this complete lack of empathy. Like it's this weird thing where they're empathizing with Jim Carrey, but yet not empathizing. They're empathizing with his dramatic character, but not the actual situation that he's in, that he's basically a trapped soul, which is so crazy and so true that I was like, wow, that's super powerful. It reminded me in some ways of like films that came, was Matrix before or after this? I don't know.
It was the next year. It was 99.
Yeah, so it's like and then Dark City, where it's like, people are in simulated realities and don't realize it. The whole simulation theory, which has gotten, popularized, was very much reminded me of that. And yeah, I do feel that the movie was a little one note, like that he should have had an opportunity to accuse all the people and like that are basically manipulating him and really abusing him. And the movie's too light. And I think that you said, Dave and Andrea, that, there was 12 edits of this script. And the first edit, I think in that article you sent, Dave, was much darker script. And I wanted to see that darker version. That darker version, that Black Mirror version, I think is something that would have been terrifying and probably like, that's basically what the Matrix became and Dark City became. But it's like Jim Carrey, I feel like he's almost miscast in this, and I know people are going to hate me for this, but he's so what's the word? Like, he's so effusive and happy and jolly and over the top, and like, if he had toned it down like he did in Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind and just played it straight, I would have liked this movie much better. I still like it, but I feel like the tone of it was just like I said, before, I think this is a sinister movie masquerading as a comedy.
Yep. I agree with that.
I think they had to. I think they kind of had to do that. I agree with you to some extent. That I had that thought several times, like when he's kind of being a caricature in some scenes where he seems like, the 1950s happy guy from a commercial or something. I was thinking, well, that seems a little like he's playing into what they're doing. He's kind of it's almost like he's in on it the way he's acting, but I think they kind of had to. Just at the time this movie came out, he was nothing but, he was on In Living Color as a sketch comedy guy. And then he had a couple of movies where he was super successful as a comic. And then I feel like it was his movie where he's like, okay, I'm going to move from comedy into drama, but you can't jump all the way in right away. You got to kind of go halfway and bring your audience with you. So they're like, oh, okay, I can see him in a drama. I think that's what they were maybe doing.
Well, and Gattaca was dark, and it made like 10% as much money as The Truman Show. So, whoever made it light does seem to have at least read the market correctly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I think that's probably. You said there were 12 drafts, and you said the first several were like very dark. I think probably the director or the one who made him have 12 drafts, I think he was like, no, we're gonna have Jim Carrey, and it's got to be this, it's got to be a certain way, and he pushed it in that direction, which made it a commercial success, but maybe didn't make it exactly what Nickel wanted it to be. But I think maybe he's got this sort of the same problem that Kaufman had, where he makes these awesome movies provided somebody is there to tell him he can't have everything he wants. And then when he starts having everything he wants, then it's like, okay, we didn't want you to go over there. That's.
I felt like it. I mean, again, it still works as it is, but I wanted it to go more like dark satire. So if you remember the scene in Natural Born Killers, where there's like that Married with Children kind of analog scene, where they're just basically reliving their childhood, and it's just horrifying, but it's played as like a sitcom, and like I almost feel like that's what we could have done here. But maybe this is like, 2024 me looking at, 1998 film and trying to apply like the aesthetics for it. Cause like, I think a lot of media has gone really grim, dark and bleak, and we lost some of that sort of naive optimism of the 90s.
Yeah. I think that is a product of the 90s where was up, everybody happy.
Yeah.
Let's talk about these other movies. So like I said, Andrew Niccol had these two like huge successes. I mean, Gattaca more so a critical success than a commercial success, but definitely a success in terms of Roger Ebert saying this is one of the best, smartest science fiction movies ever made, things like that. And so he goes from that, and then he makes this movie Simone. It's about a director who is sick of working with actors, and he creates a fully digital actor to be in his movie, and the digital actor becomes super popular. I'm just going to summarize all three of these movies here. There's In Time, which is a dystopian movie about a society where everyone's genetically engineered to be 25 years old forever, but then they have these like clocks in their forearms, the counting down, and they die if the clock gets to zero, and they have to like work to build up more time on their clocks. And then recently there was this Netflix movie Anon, which, as I said, I'd never even heard of, where it's in a future of mass surveillance, and there's like a serial killer who's hacking into people's recordings and showing them themselves being murdered as they're being murdered, and then the police are able to like tap into anyone's visual memory like recording and see what happened in the past. And then there's like hackers who are evading that system. And so all the concepts I think are really cool. And all these movies, for the first 20 or 30 minutes, I was like, I thought that this was going to be bad. And so far, this is actually kind of cool. But then all of them in the end did end up about what they were reputed to be, what I expected them to be. So these are Rotten Tomatoes scores of 51%, 37%, and 36%. So again, like I was really interested going into this. How did Andrew Niccol go from these two huge successes to these not successes more recently, at least in terms of science fiction? He's done some non-science fiction movies that have been better received. But in terms of the science fiction movies, that was the big question I had. So I guess just the first thing I'm curious is, did anyone like any of these three movies more than the Rotten Tomatoes scores had led you to expect?
Well, I love Simone.
Okay.
I liked it better. I saw it when it came out. I saw it in the theater. And I remember being kind of lukewarm about it. I was like, it's all right. And I watched it now, and I do feel that it's too long, and it could have used a rigorous cut. But I was like, this movie actually like kind of works, and I feel like it works maybe more today than it did in 2002 for a lot of the reasons that we're going through now. Like literally, SAG went on strike for the very reasons of this movie. They were like, we are not going to be replaced with digital actors. We are not going to have our likenesses recreated and used and not, in perpetuity and not get any money for that. So I thought Simone was more satirical than I remembered. I don't remember like sort of the funny beats to it. And I feel like that was a smart choice by the director to bring humor into it, because it really is kind of bleak. I know I'm contradicting myself with the Truman Show, but I forgot Winona was in it too. It was just weird seeing Pacino in a role where he was like, his main thing was sitting at a computer. Like, I don't know. I just always imagined him playing these like tough guy roles, and he's like this kind of nebbishy director.
This movie reminded me a lot of Inner Space that we talked about before, in terms of like being way too long and being only intermittently funny, but I ended up being sort of affectionate toward it. But I wouldn't like give it a strong recommendation or anything. But I'm curious, Tom, what did you think of Simone?
This was my least favorite of this whole batch of movies. And Andrea, I can see maybe why you would like it a lot, because you're in that world of making TV shows and movies, and so I think I don't know, I can kind of understand that, but I thought it was I think back when it was released in 2002, it was technically advanced, but the special effects don't hold up today. And it's an interesting concept, but I always feel that in any movie about movies makers, it always seems that the movie within the movie is so bad that it's hard for me to believe that the movie makers are these successful people, or that they have these wonderful movies going on and amass these huge followings. So, like, for example, the artificial actress to me, Simone, didn't look like a good actress. She just looked like a super hot woman. So like some, a supermodel or something. So I didn't understand why it's like, oh, she's this great actress and she's so amazing.
I think it was satire. I don't think she was meant to be great. I think she was meant to be like cliche and campy and just like, like beautiful, but like in a sort of cliche way. You know what I mean?
Okay.
Just an amalgamation of,
Interesting trivia. Andrew Niccol married the actress who played Simone.
Yeah.
If you didn't know that. But, I thought it sort of missed an opportunity to like I think it would be funny if she's sort of like, fake, and because she's so fake, the Hollywood. She just like everyone in Hollywood loves her because they're also so fake. You know, like she's literally fake and they're figuratively fake, but they're sort of simpatico in that way. I didn't feel like that really came through at all to me, but I feel like that's what that would be funny if it. Yeah, that was my impression.
Well, like Catherine Keener, plays this, studio executive, and then it's like she just comes off as very fake to me. Like she's just like fair weather. Like as soon as someone's popular, I love you, and as soon as you're not, like see you later. And it was just like I just thought she was just sort of a stand-in for the whole.
No. The Hollywood people definitely come off as fake, but the movie to me didn't draw the connection between them being all fake and everything and Simone being fake. Like it just like that connection wasn't strong enough to be really funny to me.
My favorite scenes from this movie were the scenes where Simone was not on screen, where the real people were interacting and they're all neurotic and funny. And there were some hilarious moments in it. With the beginning with Winona Ryder being such a prima donna. I pictured that being like the catalyst for this movie. Like the writer, Andrew Niccol, probably experienced someone like that. I met people like that when I went to visit my friend's uncle is Alan Davia, who was a cinematographer for, he's the head cinematographer for like Indiana Jones, the Raiders of the Lost Ark and Empire of the Sun and all these huge movies. And he took us around Hollywood and I met people like who acted like that about having to have the right candy pulled out or stuff like that. So I pictured that was like the catalyst, and she was real fun to watch. And I also thought like some of the scenes with some of the other, there was one character who was like talking about, actually I thought this was pretty funny when she gets like, Simone gets like angry and she's like, have you ever tried pan-fried dolphin with like, I don't know, with butter on it? And she's all excited about that. That there was some really funny parts.
He's trying to make her unpopular. So he's having her say really offensive things.
Right.
Okay. So here's my take on this movie. I agree with Matt that it needed an edit. It's too long, 100%. But the thing is, it's a total satire. So all of it's ridiculous. Well, first of all, it's not a satire of Hollywood. It's a satire of celebrity, the cult of celebrity. That's what it's about. Yeah. And the Catherine Keener character, there are people like that. You're on top, they love you. The minute you hit the bottom, they're gone. Absolutely 100%. And I think this was a satire that had two teeth to it. Because the things that I was thinking about when I was watching this was The Player, which is a sharp satire, Adaptation, really good. Also a sharp satire. And also, right from the beginning, it gave me Charlie Kaufman vibes. Could have been because Catherine Keener was in it, but very Charlie Kaufman vibes in the way that being John Malkovich, because you're talking about the terrible movies he's making. First of all, he's making art movies, which are, inherently terrible. So that's the joke. Like they've taken an art film, a director of art films who's just exclusively wants to make art films, and all of a sudden, because of her, they're becoming popular and everybody loves them. I mean, that's like being John Malkovich, where he takes puppetry and he becomes famous as a puppeteer. It's absurd. So it's an absurd thing. The whole movie is absurd and grows more and more and more absurd as it. Okay, but so Andrea,
like a second ago, I described this movie as only intermittently funny. No, what do you think about that?
There are parts that drag, which I think goes back to Matt's point of it needs an edit. But I had some serious belly laughs throughout the whole thing. And because somebody brought up the scene where he's trying to quote unquote ruin her career, so she says all this crazy shit. That scene was just like one, hilarious and horrifying, because if you listen to what she says, she brings up firing range at school. How are they going to protect themselves? And ozone layer, I can't see the hole. And immigration, wow, it's crowded here anyway. Those are literally jokes that at the time, 20 years ago, those were jokes that would have made her unpopular, made people hate her. 20 years later, now, that's an entire political platform.
Yeah.
Am I right?
Yeah. Yeah. No, I thought the exact same thing. I'm like, wow. Like today, just like people would be like, yeah, I'm on board.
Yeah.
Or at least
all of them.
Half the country, right?
All of them. Every single one of them. This movie is so prescient in so many ways.
Yes.
Not just the AI actors, but those three things. It's shockingly prescient. And which makes it even more funny than it was.
It's just, I wasn't like at all enthusiastic to watch this movie from the first time I heard of it, because I was like, it just like, why would he have to keep this a secret? Like that just never made any sense to me. Like, why wouldn't he just brag that they had a digital character who is so convincing, and he could, this could be like the Unreal Engine where he makes like 100 times as much money licensing out the technology as from actually making a movie out of it. So
you're trying to make this reality. All of these movies are outside reality. They're stylized in the way that that's not what the point is to me. Like the tech isn't the point. At the time I was so shocked by this movie and how much I loved it. I went to read reviews of why people didn't like it. Half of them were like, this is amazing. I love this movie. And then the other half was like, that tech's ridiculous. That looks terrible. Who would like? It was just like you're coming at it from a viewpoint of this is a realistic representation of life and people, and it's not. They're all characterizations of humans.
You know how I knew you
caricatures of humans.
Yeah, you know how I knew you weren't supposed to take the tech seriously. Like when he's in the studio. His computer's in the middle of the room, and there is not a single plug or wire or anything. And then he destroys the computer with a 5 1/4 inch floppy, which didn't even in the year this was made, that was already dated. Like they didn't it was like it wasn't. I don't think you were supposed to take the tech seriously.
No.
Like a computer with that kind of power and it's running a 5 1/4 inch flop. Like it was just
ridiculous.
It's like you're not. I don't think you're supposed to take.
I just feel like this would have been more compelling, and maybe this is just my personal taste or whatever. But if there were like some reason why he had to keep the fact that it's a digital creation secret, which the movie in its current form doesn't provide at all. Or be a movie about where everybody knows it's a digital creation and he's like, I don't need you actors anymore. Look at this amazing digital creation I've got now. And the conflict comes out of that. I feel like, at least for my taste personally, either one of those would have been preferable to what we got here. Where
Looker from the 80s was about digital people that they didn't need actors anymore.
Okay, I've never heard of that. Is it good at all, or?
It's campy 80s sci-fi. It's okay.
So it's good, is what you're saying?
Yeah.
Our level of good or actual level of good?
Let's do a panel about it.
We could do a bad 80s movies. We could add that to the list.
Yeah.
Does it strike anyone that we have entered the science fiction that we read about when we were kids?
Yeah.
It's frightening.
Yeah, 100%.
It's crazy.
None of this is really science fiction anymore.
We could do a whole panel.
Watching humanoid robots and digital people and rockets that take off and land and self-driving cars and
AI, I mean,
all this stuff is, I'm like, what the heck?
Okay, before we go off on too much of a tangent with that, let's talk about In Time and Anon. So Andrea and Matt had fondness for Simone. Does anyone feel that In Time or Anon have anything to offer beyond just cool premises?
I liked In Time. I personally thought it was a really good movie and definitely worth watching with a couple of flaws.
It reminds me of Logan's Run. I found the whole premise silly. Like their time was like a metaphor for basically money, right? Time became money, but money itself is a metaphor for work. So it's like it didn't quite work. And then the whole mechanism of like you shake hands and you can steal someone's money, but like you could do it exactly down to the. I mean, again, maybe I shouldn't be looking at the tech too closely, but it was just the whole idea of it seemed kind of silly. I did like the idea of the time, quote unquote, time zones, that like the rich live in, and to travel to the rich zone, you have to give up months of your life, which was kind of, interesting premise, but yeah.
I'll say I loved the scene where the main character is Justin Timberlake and his mother is Olivia Wilde, and since everyone's 25 in this world, they look the same age. And she misses the bus, or for complicated reasons, she misses the bus, and her clock is running out, and so she's running down the street to get to him so he can give her more time, and he's running toward her, and just as they're about to touch, she flops dead into his arms. And at that moment, I was like, wow, this is really cool. I'm actually really into this movie. But then I felt like it just got, again, with the poorly written female characters, I thought that the whole Bonnie and Clyde thing was just dumb and made no sense. And it just felt very formulaic Hollywood as it developed. So I guess, Tom, what did you like about it? And you said you had some flaws or some problems as well.
Yeah, I disagree. That I felt that the metaphor worked really well for me. I think any good science fiction movie should resonate with what we know to be true about our own lives, and I think this one does that in spades. I thought to whatever degree, we're all driven by a need to trade our lives for time. Most of us are wage slaves in a sense. We trade 40 hours a week for the ability to stay alive and hopefully enjoy ourselves the rest of the time, or more. In some people's cases, Andrea, we trade 80 hours a week and hopefully enjoy ourselves the rest of the time. That's even doctors, they'll work crazy hours and they're like, I'm making a lot of money. I'm extending my lifespan. But that's why watching this movie is so painful at times to me. I thought that really resonated. No,
I agree 100%. The concept is super cool. It was the execution that I wasn't enamored with.
That me too. I had problems. But I did think Amanda Seyfried, Cillian Murphy, Vincent Kartheiser, and most of the rest of the cast did a great job. I think the world is very richly imagined. I think it's packed with so many fun details that all relate to the premise of the movie, the time thing. But the things I didn't like were, I think Justin Timberlake is great and he's a good actor, but something about him in this movie just seemed a little generic. And I thought there were certain details that didn't fit, like life in the ghetto in this movie is terrifying, right? Because they could all die at any moment. But his mom's house didn't look anything like a house in a ghetto. It looked like a regular suburban house. And I thought the villains should have been more sympathetic. I thought Cillian Murphy's character was sympathetic, but Vincent Kartheiser and all of the other rich people are just foils. They're just pure evil. And I feel like the movie would have resonated with me a lot more if we could have seen, what's their point of view? How do they see themselves as good people? How are they the hero in their own story? Because I totally couldn't. All I could see was they're like, haha, I'm a villain.
I thought the world was really interesting, and I would have liked to see more of the world and less of the kind of plot contrivances. But how about
but also
Andrea? How about Matt?
So parts of it were interesting, but Justin Timberlake is supposed to be this everyman who grows up in the ghetto, and then when he goes to the rich party house, and then the police interrogate him, suddenly he becomes John Wick, and then next thing he's he knows martial arts, and he's flipping over stairs and knocking people out and running away, and it's it just got ridiculous. I think it would have been a stronger movie if he was more fumbling and just trying to survive, and I just felt like I was hit. The metaphor was I kept getting hit over the head with a mallet. Look at this metaphor. Look at the time that we're stealing from each other, and look at the how the 1% steals from everybody else, and it just it could have used some subtlety.
Andrea, what do you think?
Well, first of all, I just want to say to Matt's point about all of a sudden he knows how to do everything. When I was watching this, I stopped it just to write down the note. He's the Mary Sue of guys.
Yeah.
He just all of a sudden, he just knows how to do everything. Shoot guns. So
race cars.
Yeah. I remember watching this when it came out, and I was just like, it's, it was an interesting sci-fi movie, but it didn't make much of an impression on me. I think a lot of that had to do with Justin Timberlake, which is kind of where I checked out pretty much, which is right from the beginning. So for me, the second time watching it, it got better. The beginning still kind of, I was just like, none of this really makes sense in the terms of like, oh, time is money. It didn't really hit me as a real thing. Huh. I couldn't suspend my disbelief for that. But it got better as it went along because I did buy into the whole Bonnie and Clyde thing. I found that interesting. And the one thing I really couldn't buy through the whole movie, this could be a woman thing. She is running in platform heels the entire film. She is climbing over roofs in platform heels. At the end scene when they're running together, she's wearing platform heels. Let me tell you, as somebody who has worn platform heels, you can barely fucking walk. So, all right, that's my thing. That's the thing that really took me out of it.
Well, which I was wondering if it maybe would have just made sense, not on the platform heels thing. I'm going to move away from that topic, but if they were just like more like robots, like they were like replicants, but they needed like power to keep operating, and that would actually make sense why there's this economy of, you know, of charging and everything. But the fact that they're like genetically engineered, like it didn't really make sense why you just drop dead. Like, what does the time actually represent? Like, yeah. So I don't know. But we're running pretty short on time, so let's fold in Anon here. Did anyone like Anon?
I thought this movie was without a doubt the weirdest romantic comedy I've ever seen.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, didn't it follow, Andrea, you know scripts. Doesn't it follow the plot of a romantic comedy, but not as a comedy? It was like a man with an interesting life. He's got a bad love life. He meets a woman with an interesting life and a bad love life. And they come together. They work through personal problems. Then there's a big misunderstanding that keeps them apart until their love for each other makes them overcome it.
I mean, it's an interesting take, but my take was really more, it's a film noir. He's a detective and she's the, you know, the dark woman, you know, the
femme fatale.
Thank you. The femme fatale. What I found interesting, I watched this before I rewatched Gattaca. So when I rewatched Gattaca, I realized he went right back to that same brutalist aesthetic. And with the quiet, like no music under anything. But it did not work this time.
Exactly.
I think really did not like this movie.
Yeah.
At all.
It was like the same, like it's like this, the direction, like the director told the actors, like, act as if you're on stage reading lines badly. And like Gattaca is a little like that, but this is like 100% like that.
Yeah, the acting was like everybody was caught in the middle of a nap. It was so slow, and you could tell they were all told to do that because everybody was doing it, but it was
But
awful.
he also used editing to extend that, in that they'll say a line and then there's this pause before he cuts to the next person to say the line. And it's just like, what? Why?
Yeah, there was way too much space
and quiet. There's so many scenes with just nothing underneath. Nothing.
Yeah, and like I agree with that's the exact note I wrote down. It was the same brutalist aesthetic as Gattaca, but if like this one for some reason felt like antiseptic. Like it felt like you see the scene of like the city and there's like not a piece of garbage anywhere.
Yep.
And like his apartment is just bare, and even the like artificial apartment, like the fake apartment, it's bare. Everything is just like bare minimum, that minimalist. And it just, I don't know, it just felt like I never suspended my disbelief. Mm-hmm. And then the whole premise, I know it's like, obviously this is all just metaphor but it's like, can't you just turn the damn heads-up display off? Yeah. like oh, he's like, well, she's in his mind, she's giving him false images. Like, can't you? You're a cop. You can't turn this off. Like, I don't know.
Also, why wouldn't you just thrash around with your arms? Like, why are you just going to stand there and be like, oh, I can see that he's putting a gun to my head?
Exactly that. Why are they not ducking?
Yeah.
That would be my first reaction. Every single person who he does this to is like, oh, oh, what do I do? Like, what
do I do? Well, this gun comes to my head, and then
Right.
And then when he's chasing her into the subway, he falls down the stairs and nobody on the platform reacts. And I get that they're also like, the metaphor of we're all on our phones and not paying attention. So they're all on their inner brain internet. But you still see somebody fall down the stairs and he's holding a gun and literally no one reacts. It's just like,
Well, that one, I thought the same thing, but that was a simulation. That was like
the whole thing. No, it wasn't. There was
the whole subway car was a simulation.
What about the
subway
platform?
car was?
The platform, there's no excuse. You're right.
Right, exactly. The platform's no excuse.
But yeah, I don't want to spend too much time on Anon. Does anyone have anything really interesting to say about Anon before I move on to anything else?
I think Amanda Seyfried had the same hair. I think they saved the wig.
The cars were cool.
The cars were cool. And also the only two women in the movie who aren't naked are the maid and there's one female cop. And that's it. Everyone else, all the other women are like naked. And that was irritating. I'm like, why?
I was impressed at how he was able to make New York City look that way.
Yeah.
I will say that. I think it's the police station at the beginning, or one of the buildings at the beginning, is a famous bar famous bar restaurant that George Washington actually ate at, and my sister had her engagement party there. So I was like, oh, I know that place.
I recognize the final where they shot the final scene was Roosevelt Island. The way at the end, there's that weird building they built there recently. That's very modern. I knew it immediately.
I didn't mind. I kind of like erotic thrillers and stuff. I didn't mind the nudity in principle. It's just like not a good enough movie to carry like that much. But this reminds me so much of Strange Days. It's like just a way worse version of Strange Days.
But also it wasn't erotic in any way. Like there was nothing titillating about it. It's just like he's fucking. That's it.
Yeah.
No, but I'm just saying like the solution to me wouldn't be to necessarily take the nudity out. It would just be to make the movie a lot better. You know, it's like that's what I'm saying about it. It's like not good enough to justify the.
I agree. With that.
Also the tech was boring. I don't like.
Yeah.
Just the way they displayed it. It was these boring boxes.
Yeah.
And it just kind of like they zoom in really slow.
Yeah.
And I was like, I started to get frustrated by like the fifth time they're zooming in. I'm like, come on. And
and you're also looking at a room full of people just staring off into space, and there's nothing visually interesting about any of that. And I get that's what it's supposed to be, but it's just like, but it's still not visually interesting.
I thought the way the tech was portrayed was kind of cool myself, but it was just like after you've seen like the Black Mirror episode, the entire history of you, it's just been like done enough that it's there's not enough new about that. And then the plot is just very like stereotypical like serial killer, sort of pablum. So like, I don't want to spend too much time on this movie, but so now I just want to wrap things up. I want to get into the question of like, what do we think of the trajectory of Gattaca to Anon over, 20 years? Like, why do we think that trajectory happened? Or what are our speculations about why that trajectory happened? My
theory is that he had a cult classic with Gattaca. It's a brilliant movie, and Truman Show was a success. And he tried to repeat that. He tried to copy that, and you could see it. He keeps going back to that aesthetic. He keeps going back to that, like Gattaca. He took the premise, like, what if we have a world where everyone can choose the pure, quote unquote, pure genetics of their children? What would that world be like? And then with each one of these successive films, that's what he's doing. What if the world, what if time was a currency? What if you had your whole life what if there was no privacy, and so I think that, maybe if he just really tries to not reinvent the wheel, but just go in a completely different direction, maybe he could do something great again. Because I do think that I sense there's a directorial vision there that I respect. I respect that he's like, I have this idea, I'm going to take it to its conclusion, kind of like the Cronenberg. I don't always love Cronenberg films, but I respect that the director is putting everything they have into their film. And I do see that in all of these.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, all of them have like a very, not just a similar aesthetic, but a similar point of view and a similar theme. There's a thread that runs through all of them. And again, yeah, I respect that. I just think specifically with Anon, the execution was not good, which is, it's, sad. Like, I wish it had been better. It could have been better, and it should have been better. That sounds really
so I mean, I think there's two ways of, there's sort of two hypotheses, right? And one is the Andrew Niccol hypothesis, and one is the Hollywood hypothesis. And the Andrew Niccol hypothesis is just like, like maybe he used up his best ideas early on, or like once he had a certain level of success, he just wasn't hungry enough to write the script 12 times, or like whatever, like that there's something about him like that caused the later movies to just not match up to the earlier movies. But the other hypothesis is that Hollywood changed in a way that made the reasons for his successes no longer exist, right? And so like there was a YouTube video I watched where they said like, Gattaca had Gattaca is a dystopian science fiction character study with no action scenes to speak of that had a $36 million budget. And they're like, that would never be made today. And so, and it wasn't even successful back in the 90s, financially successful back in the 90s which was a much more, a much more friendly climate to sort of mid-budget science fiction, sort of experimental or like ambitious science fiction movies. So, it's possible that Andrew Niccol, and what really made me get thinking on this is that somewhere I read that he had pitched, like after Simone, I guess, he had pitched a whole bunch of things that like he just couldn't get made. And that In Time was the first thing he pitched that they sort of bid on because of the youth angle. They're like, oh, a story in which every character is 25. This is awesome, So it may be that the work that he really wants to do is getting filtered out by the Hollywood system. And what we're left with is the stuff that he's able to sell, which is just like not as good.
That sounds likely.
That sounds likely. Yep.
I don't know was it in that article I sent you guys? There was the thing, I don't remember now where I read it, if it was in there or somewhere else, but like, he's like, the project I really want to make is about like a descendant of the native tribes that originally inhabited Manhattan.
Yeah.
Like living in
the Lenape, yeah.
Living in the wilds of Central Park. And like, obviously he can't get it made, but it's like, I get the sense maybe that's what he really wants to be doing rather than Anon, but Anon
I'd love to see that.
Yeah, that sounds. When I read that premise, I said that sounds really interesting. I mean, and timely too.
Yeah.
But couldn't he go to like Netflix or one of these streaming services and say, look, it's probably going to be low budget because it's going to be just actors and there's not like a bunch of special effects and we can do it cheap and I want to do this. And
Tom, this is why you should have read the article because he actually talks about that. He says, quote, "The ideas that occur to me are expensive and unconventional. That is the worst combination. You could go to a studio with an expensive idea or an unconventional idea, but not an expensive, unconventional idea."
Yeah.
So,
but why is that particular filming like a Native American in the living in Central Park? Why is that expensive?
I guess that's the point. Were you going to say something, Andrea?
Well, I was going to say, these unconventional ideas. It's also about like people. There may be this superhero fatigue, but people still want that kind of movie. That's what they'll pay big bucks for. Yeah. Something small and niche like Lenape's on Manhattan Island, and I don't know, 500 years ago. It appeals to me because
I think it was it was present day.
Oh, it's
present
present day. Oh,
So it's unconventional,
Even
but
more
it's cheap, is what I'm saying. So it's unconventional, but it's cheap.
It's not cheap to shoot in New York.
That's what I was going to say. It's probably really hard to like get a permit to film in the park.
The premise of this movie is that there's a descendant of those original inhabitants still trying to live that way in the modern day, like living in Central Park as if it's like the wilds of North America before it was settled.
It seems like it wouldn't have a giant box office take, but I'm like, is it really going to cost? Like, if it makes like $10 million at the box office, is it really going to cost? I don't know. It seems. I guess you're saying it would cost a lot to shoot in Central Park.
Yeah,
I would love to see more of these types of films that we're discussing than these like Marvel blockbusters.
Farther and farther away from this. Every single thing is a remake.
November.
Go
to the movies right now. November.
It's not about
we went and saw.
Yeah.
We went and saw Lost on a Mountain in Maine, and there were like 5 or 6 other dramas in the theater at the same time, and I was like, it must be because it's November. Like, this is when they put their dramas.
Yeah. Well, if it's that, it's usually Oscar time, like the stuff they want. I think that's that's late in the year, early in the year, something like that. But sorry, I think I lost the thread of what I was going to say.
Well, let me say, I mean, like, but the sad thing is, like, if I'm being real, I would 100% watch the movie about the Native American living in Central Park today.
Yeah.
If I were a Netflix executive and someone came to me and pitched me that idea and wanted, like, even as little as $1 million, I would say no. It's not going to make its money back. You know, and that's the sad reality.
I mean, Netflix and everything, the entire industry is contracting because it's not run by people who love art and movies anymore. It's run by business people. It's run by VCs, and all they care about is making money. And, you know, these VCs, these companies, they work on this financial platform where everything has to increase. The money they make has to increase every year. That's not what art does. Art is not about increasing how much money you can make, your take. It's about taking risks. These are not people who take risks. So that's that era of great art and you know, big pitches or big swings. It's not going to happen anymore. Not with any of the studios, not with any of the streamers, ever.
Yeah, you wouldn't necessarily see like a Good Will Hunting come out today, or
now
the mid-budget movies are dead.
It's sad.
Yeah,
it's very sad.
And everything's a remake. I just saw something recently that they're now remaking Friday Night Lights, the TV show. They're remaking Friday Night Lights. Yeah,
what?
It's absurd.
Like, I just watched it recently, and it's so good. Why would you remake that?
Why would you remake Twilight? Why would you remake Harry Potter? Why would you remake any of these things? It's ridiculous. But it's because it's got a built-in audience, and they know people are going to come and watch it. That's why.
All right. Well, so before we get too depressed, let me just bring up 2 other things I wanted to mention before we wrap up. And I know Tom has to go, so I won't take too much longer. I just wanted to read this. This is from a review of Anon from the Times. It says, "If there were a bad sex award for films, this would walk it. Owen has 3 liaisons with different women that are so robotic they make pornography look warm and naturalistic. For one, he keeps his vest on." Sorry, I'm going to have a hard time not laughing about this. "For one, he keeps his vest on like a guest in a 50s boarding house. And during all of them, he has the expression of a man contemplating the imminent crowding of his bathroom." So I thought that was really funny. But then the other thing I wanted to mention is that actually Harlan Ellison threatened to sue the production of In Time, saying that it had ripped off his short story, "Repent Harlequin," said the TikTok man. Oh, God. But then apparently eventually they showed him the movie and he dropped his complaints at that time, possibly because he didn't want his story to be associated with that movie.
That sounds, having spent about an hour on the phone with Harlan Ellison, that sounds so true. So
That's
exactly
hilarious.
Harlan Ellison. That, by the way, was the most fraught hour of my life.
What?
Talking to Harlan Ellison.
What were you talking to him for?
I was trying to get an interview out of him, and he wanted to get paid for it.
Yeah.
And
he doesn't do anything
he
without
does
getting
not
paid,
do anything
according to the
without getting
documentary.
paid. And we ended up just talking, and it was like it was a fucking fencing lesson. I hung up the phone and had to go have a drink. At one point, he started yelling at me about something, and then like he misinterpreted something I said, and he started getting mad, and I had to like frantically no, that's not what I meant, and he's like, oh okay, and I was just like, oh my God,
You are so lucky.
I've never had anybody rattle my cage like that.
You're like part of history now. I would love to have been yelled at by Harlan Ellison.
Almost yelled at. He started to get angry, and then I talked him down. I was like, "Oh my God!"
You could put that on your bio. Almost yelled at.
Almost yelled at by Harlan Ellison.
I would,
but I haven't read this story. Repent Harlequin said the TikTok man in decades, but from what I remember, it has virtually no meaningful similarities to In Time. So,
well, it says TikTok.
Well, no, there is. I mean, from what I remember, it's a story about a dystopian society where everyone has to do everything on a really tight schedule, and there's like a rebel who like is trying to gum up the works and gets caught and brainwashed. I think 1984 style. It's been a long time, but it's just not that. Like the idea that it would be, that there would be a lawsuit over it has no justification. At least based on my memories.
I just read it ostensibly for a panel that you and I were going to do,
sorry about that.
Then you had to go and have a baby, and now you got no time. But no, I think he probably was just like, "Hey, you stole the contents of my toilet. Never mind, you can keep it."
Yeah. All right. So we should wrap this up. So, any final thoughts from Matt on this experience of watching these Andrew Niccol movies?
He's so anonymous that I didn't even connect all these films together. I think Gattaca is I agree, it's one of the best science fiction films of the 20th century by far. It is so good. Definitely watch that. Truman Show I enjoyed. I don't know if I would ever want to watch it again. The others, I would say they're disposable. Simone was entertaining, but it has its flaws, and the other two I didn't enjoy that much, with the exception of a few scenes here and there. But Gattaca, watch that.
Yeah, I would say The Truman Show and Gattaca, I think, as I said, are must watch. I mean, it's interesting. It's hard for me to say The Truman Show, I feel like maybe doesn't have the same impact now as it did when it first came out, because so much has happened, that sort of, I'm sure it feels much less, striking now than it did back then. But I would still say they're both must-watch movies, and the other three I would not recommend. If you're really interested, I would watch maybe the first half hour, because they do have cool concepts, and you kind of get everything you need out of the concepts in the first half hour, but don't watch the rest of them on my say-so. So, Andrea, final thoughts?
Not all, clearly not all of them are successful, but I respect them as an artist and as a writer, and I respect his vision. Gattaca, one of the greatest science fiction movies of the 20th century. Truman Show falls a little flat, but I still enjoyed it, and I felt more real to me now than when it did when it first came out. I love Simone. It's got flaws, but I still enjoyed it quite a great deal, and I would recommend it. But if you don't like it, I don't really want to hear it. But Anon is terrible. Oof. So don't go there. But I really do hope that somebody takes a chance with him, because he is a director that deserves that chance of, let's see what you can do.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, and say what you will about some of these later movies, but I mean, he is someone who writes, they're not sequels, they're not like whatever franchise
remakes,
spin-offs. They're about ideas. They certainly have artistic ambition.
He did write the script for The Host, though, which is an adaptation of Stephenie Meyer book.
Yeah, but these 5 movies that were
they're his.
About, I wouldn't watch that now, but but yeah, like with the exception of the Stephenie Meyer adaptation that he wrote, he seems to be a really interesting, smart guy, really prescient in a lot of ways, really concerned about technology in the future, and comes up with really, really cool concepts to play with those ideas. And the execution was spotty some of the time, but at least he's trying. The ambition is there, I guess, is what I would say. Yeah. But so Tom, final thoughts.
Yeah, I go along with what you all said. I mean, I disagree a little bit about one of the movies, but I'm not going to say which one because Andrea won't tell me. She said not to mention it. But then again, I liked In Time better than the rest of you. But I agree. I think we can all agree. Don't watch Anon, and definitely go back and check out Gattaca and the Truman Show, and the first 30 minutes of the others. That sounds like a good plan. And I do hope he keeps making movies. I really hope. I just feel like he should just like maybe try to find some way to make them cheap, make movies that don't have to have special effects and don't have to have a big budget or anything. And if he could make that one about the Wrapup in Central Park, try to find a way to make that happen. Go find somebody who will fund him for it. Somebody who thinks it's a cool idea and has a lot of money and is like, yeah, I'll give you a couple million for it. Movies like that would stretch him, that would, just like Matt was saying, like, don't look back at your past success, look forward, do a Don Draper, keep moving forward. Don't look back at what you did, forget about that, and try to do something cool and new. And I think he probably would still make some really cool stuff.
I don't know why, but that reminds me of something from the article that I wanted to mention that I thought was really interesting, is that the swimming thing from Gattaca is something that he actually did. I mean, he didn't have a brother, so he just did it by himself. Oh, wow. But he would swim out into the ocean as far as he could to test his. Wow.
Well, here's the funny thing: I actually had a version of that too when I was a kid. We used to spend our summers in upstate New York, and when there's no moon, we're in the country, and when there was no moon, the property would be black, so that the house was lit, but everything else was black. So I used to have this thing where when it was that dark, I would leave the house at night and walk down the hill into the darkness to see how far I could get before I was too scared to keep going, and then I'd run back to the house. I don't know what that says, but yeah, I have a version of that from my childhood.
I used to swim across a lake in Maine and back every day, twice, and I used to test how late in the season I could do it until I was shivering so bad. And I would always think, like, I wonder if hypothermia will overtake me this time. And I would get out and my whole body would be shaking because it would be November and I'd still be doing it.
Oof, cold.
Yeah, so
I don't have a story like that. But I did go bodyboarding in a hurricane once.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we'll have to hear that story on a future episode because we are all out of time. So let's wrap things up there. So we've been speaking with Andrea Kail, Matthew Kressel, and Tom Gerencer. So thanks everyone so much for joining us.
Thanks, Dave.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, Dave.
And that was our panel. So big thanks again to Andrea Kail, Matthew Kressel, and Tom Gerencer for joining us on the show. This episode of Geek's Guide to the Galaxy was made possible thanks to support from listeners like you. So if you enjoy the show and want it to continue, please support us on Patreon over at patreon.com/geeks or via PayPal over at geeksguideshow.com/crowdfunding. All right, so that was our show. So thanks everyone for listening, and we'll see you next time.